Good morning, one and all. We're not going to make you wait any longer. We have 45 minutes to see how transport today and tomorrow can face up to climate challenges. Now, we have Stéphane Lévesque. He's the director of URF, French Road Union. We have the institutional director of Pascal TEBIBEL. It's with COLAS. And we have Pierre CHASSERAY, who's done a lot of television and audio work for car drivers. And Jean-Luc Gautier, who's technical director and in charge of the Experts and Documentary Center of COLAS. And you may have heard about Mr. DUHOO, who's a project manager. You may have heard about him since yesterday. Now we're going to talk about mobility by road in the world of transport. We're going to see what the situation is. We're going to see how much and also how much in terms of emissions. We're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, of course. We want to see if things have changed over recent years and if they're going to change in the future. And we'll look further into the future to see how things are going to change with mobility and if we can manage such change. Now, we often forget the users, and we're going to ask Pierre to do that. He's just published a book on pollution for Greens. And in conclusion, COLAS told us about a major innovation yesterday called What Way? It's an energy-generating road using solar energy. And this is with clean mobility, part of the energy transition, and we'll be looking at that, and he'll be telling us about that. But we're going to get right onto the subject now. Stéphane Lévesque has published a book which is called Facts and Figures, and I would urge you all to read it. It's about the world of transportation, and do we have some indicators on the situation of road transport for emissions and also for quantity for both passenger traffic and cargo traffic. Good morning, one and all. Now, you gave us a few figures on the economic impact of road transport. We're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about road building, equipment and maintenance, and there are also the vehicles, making and repairing vehicles, and all the road-related services such as transport, goods transport, passenger transport, fuel, retail business, and fuel transport, and insurance. So in this scope, road account for 10% of jobs in France, and roads bring in money, some 38 billion euros a year. That's with road and car taxes. And there's around 18 billion which central or local administrative services devote. And so there's more than 20 billion surplus credit generated by roads every year. Now, I was asked to give some figures for the impact of road traffic. We've got goods traffic and passenger percent, 88% and 83% for private cars, and 5.4% for buses and coaches. So you can see that public transport may be trains and trams, but you also have buses and coaches, and these are 2014 figures, and it hasn't factored in the expansion of the coach transport business with Macron legislation in France. Now, what's the breakdown if you look at rail transport? And I'm talking about public transport here again. Now, public transport is 5.4 and rail transport is 10.2. So if you look at land transport, you've got rail and road. Road is 1/3. This is for public transport on land, not by sea or air. And there's a change with legislation in France with Macron law. Now, for goods transport, road accounts for 88% of that, and rail transport in 2014 was just over 10%. It's pretty steady, except when you look at goods transport in France, it hasn't gone to rail over the last 10 years. Road has actually gained 2%. Now, that's different in Europe, where there have been rail reforms, particularly in Germany, and there's been more goods traffic going by rail in Germany. Environmental quality. Here we have 4 variables. Transport, and in particular road transport, is 27% of end-user energy consumption. That's been pretty steady over the last 10 years. For greenhouse gas emissions, and it's not just CO2, but it's mainly CO2. I can give you some figures. The transport sector is the main greenhouse gas emitting sector in France. Then you have housing, that's around 18%. The manufacturing industry is 17%. And energy-related industry is 11%. That's for France. And compared to other countries in Europe, the impact of energy is lower, but that's because of the nuclear power sources in France. Now, when we look at the 28%, you've got 90% of that by road. And roads are often, road transport is criticized for that, but since 2005, there's been a downward trend of 6% per annum of these emissions, and air transport has gone up by 2%. So it's minus 6%, but there's been an increase in road transport. Yes, around a 10% increase over the period since 2005. Yes, there's been an improvement in energy efficiency. The quantity of energy per passenger or per metric cube of freight has improved, and that's been proven with statistics from the Ministry for Ecology and Sustainable Development. Now, for nitrogen oxides, 54%, and it's gone down by a factor of 2.2 over the past 20 years. And the nitrogen oxides is 58%, and that's 90% of that 58% is road. And there's a virtual trend there, because there's a 55% downward trend since 1990, because that was the baseline for Kyoto. And the last point is on particulate emissions. That's a difficult point, and that's gone down by a factor of 2.4 over the last 20 years. Transport is 19% of that, and overall emissions related to transport since 1990 have gone down by 60%. So we've got a virtuous trend there, and we can see there's been an improvement in technology, not just technology, but there's also been improvement in organization of transport and logistics and flow, in particular for goods transport. Now, these data aren't collected at the exhaust pipe. These are analyses of air quality. Yes, they're real analyses, they're overall emissions, and we've got it from a reference organization, a reference body in France recognized for statistics on emissions. We can see there's a substantial drop there, even though we've had an increase in traffic. Is that going to continue? Are we in a virtual cycle, or is that going to come to a stop at one point? Now, as I said, this a virtuous circle is already the trend, and we've also had improvements with the vehicles themselves, and also with the organization of the logistic flows. That's for goods traffic, goods logistics and flows. And we've seen this with the legislation in France, the Macron legislation. We've got the role of infrastructure, and particularly the hubs, and the question of road terminuses, which are the missing link, which we need to link up with coach services, with car parks for individual private transport, or with regional rail transport or tram transport. Okay, thank you. Now we've got Pascal TEBIBEL. You're the head of a think tank which is called the Mobility Circle. I talk about e-learning, remote work. Are we still going to be moving in the future, moving from one point to another, or will technological developments have us all staying at home? And will we end up with efficiency in transport because there'll be fewer people being transported? Well, good morning. I think if you look in the long term and at a global scale, mobility is up against huge challenges, and mobility is going to keep on increasing. And if you look at our think tank, we really study the trends, and the experts, with the OECD experts, say that mobility will keep on increasing, not just for people and for goods. And I think I have the figures here now for both goods transport and for passenger transport. By 2050, mobility will go up by a factor of 3 or even 4. So when you realize how much of an impact mobility has on greenhouse gas emissions, you can see that there's a real lever here for energy efficiency if you can take action on mobility. Now, why is this mobility going up? There are a number of factors that coincide. There's globalization of trade, and that's going to keep on going. And there's an important point, which is demography. You can see the world population, which is increasing there, and the figures going up to 2050. There'll be more than 9 billion of us by then. And we can see the type of population too. There was a change in 2008 when there was a turning point with more than half the population living in urban environments. And that's going to increase to 60% by 2050. 60% of the world population will be living in urban environments. So what does that mean? That's 70%. That means you'll have a lot of density, you'll have more economic development, you'll have more trade. And we know that mobility is going to be a key point. It's access to employment, healthcare services, education, and well-being and enjoyment. In other words, if we don't do anything, you're going to have an increase in mobility and greenhouse gas emissions, then we'll be heading for disaster. And if we're going to have sustainable transport, we have to go for innovation and technological improvements. And we can see this for both vehicles and improvement in transport flows. There's no other alternative. So vehicles will develop, mobility will develop, technologies will develop. And you've just come from the World Congress on the ITS. Have you found ways which will be the best way of dealing with this? No. As we heard, road is going to be the main vector for the future. And it's really the basic pillar for mobility. And often we think that road transport is just private vehicles, but it's also public transport. As soon as you put 2 people in a vehicle, you have a drastic improvement in energy efficiency. So how can we improve this pooling? And at the ETS, the Emission Trading Scheme Congress, we saw that the advent of digital technology is going to be a complete revolution in the mobility chain, because it completely changes the different players and the mobility modes. Will optimize flows and traffic. And we've seen that with the smartphone and broadband access to the internet, we've completely changed our uses, and it's going to be really mastering this technology, which is going to help us master mobility. And the smartphone is like a Swiss penknife. It gives you an answer to everything for mobility. You can check the traffic just as you wake up and see what is going to happen. And there'll be changes for transport, as I said, for both passenger transport and for goods transport, with urban logistics, optimization of rounds and urban logistics. And things are already happening. We can see it. We've seen there's been sharing, car sharing, and we've got private taxi services, and we're soon going to have driverless vehicles. This is really going to change the scene. And we won't be talking about public transport in the future. We'll be talking about shared transport. And with digital technology, we're going to see that we pool every possible way of moving around. That's going to be the change. We're going to be sharing. And we're going to be sharing microchips, and this is going to completely change public transport. Now, I think the OECD did a study on how much you can gain on road transport from driverless vehicles. Yes, I'll come back to this study, which is called the Lisbon study. Now, imagine that you take all the vehicles off the road and put driverless vehicles on the road. Then you'd have the same level of mobility with just one car in 10, with a tenth as many cars. And this is an approach which shows us that this will completely change the way cities are. You'll have better traffic flow. You won't need all these parking spaces on the street or even underground parking. There'll be lots more space available. And for the city of Lisbon, it's the equivalent of 250 football fields. So this is a real revolution which is on the way. And here politicians need to address these questions, and the decision makers need to look at it. And it's a question of governance. And governance has to fit in with users. And it's the users who are going to be ahead of the politicians, and the politicians will have to fit in. Take the example of Paris. We've got silo mobility, you've got the municipal council, you've got the free vehicles, you've got the public transport authority, and so in the future governance will have to fit in with users. Okay, well that's good. Now, Pierre CHASSERAY, we're going to talk about users. You know about users. You've got a lot in your drivers association. Do they feel guilty at the moment? Do they think they've been trapped? Well, there are two different images. You've got the media image, the way the opinion is presented, and we're told that that car users, well, for example, there was a car manufacturer who had that great drama recently, and we're told it was the scandal of the century. But you know how many people called into our association to ask questions about their cars of that brand? Only one. There have been weeks of pages of press about this scandal, but very few people are actually interested in it. What happens to a driver? He's got a budget and he chooses the car he can afford. That's it. It's quite simple. If you give him the most virtuous vehicle, then he's happy. If you make him feel guilty because he can't afford a better vehicle, then it's a negative effect. There are two ways of seeing ecology. You can see the theory of ecology. It's a bit of a backward growth approach. The idea that you might be able to live without a car. You don't have to keep the roads in good condition. All of this is for the past. And then there's another view. It's a more modern type of ecology, which we advocate. And I would say that real ecology is to look to the future with research and development helping. If you take a car as we had them 40 years ago, and you take a car as we have them today, they're not the same. The emissions are not the same. Okay, well, maybe some people are cheating, but are the vehicles polluting more? No, they're polluting less than they did in the past. Everything's better because we've invested in research and development. Look at roads. When I became the general delegate of the association, 40 million drivers, roads were made out of tar. That was it. And then I learned all sorts of things. And I heard that there are road surfaces that can help you save energy because you've got better yield from the road surface. And I thought that's incredible. You can do research and development into road quality. And now I'm hearing about solar energy producing road surfaces. Is this the future? Because we're going to have a problem with energy storage. Will the solution for the future be energy underneath our wheels? And the question of energy from carbon sources and carbon pollution, maybe the solution will be from the road. But I'll pinch a quote from someone else. It's Pascal TEBIBEL who said it. The road is the first network in France. We're all on the road. And the road was built to link people together, to link everyone together in the country, to link people around in the country. People talk about roads across the sky or across the oceans. You need to have these different routes. Okay, people are increasingly urban, but they still go off to the mountains and other places for their holidays. So they don't stay locked into cities for their lives. We want to be close to work, want to live close to work, but we need to go out for a breath of fresh air, and so we'll always need the road to get around, and that will be systematically so. As for ecology, well, of course, you realize that it's not very politically correct these days to be a car owner. You're better off saying, oh, I can live without a car. I get on very well without a car. I'm a greenie, and that's the trend these days. But that's not what people want. I think the first question that you need to look at, whether you're a corporate manager or a head of an organization or a political decision maker, you have to understand what people do in their everyday life. I don't know if we have reporters here, but this is the first thing you learn when you go to journalism school. We're told that the press, radio, and TV have to tell you what people's lives are like. But when I look at television today, it really doesn't show you what people do in their everyday life. The same with the radio, the same with the press. I have the impression that we're getting something which is quite different. We're not there taking up the real challenges that are there. Now, what drivers want these days, it's quite simple, really. When we send out an email, and we've got 1.5 million people in our basic list, and when we send out a message saying, be careful, there are new road surfaces coming in, they'll make less noise, we get an incredible response rate with people opening up these email messages. It means people are interested. And when you talk to people about the state of roads and what can be done with them, they're interested in it. But why don't people talk about it in the media? I don't know. I don't see that in the newspaper. When are we going to get the front page in the tabloid press talking about the future of roads and what's going to happen on the roads? Well, maybe it'll happen soon. But at one stage or another, we'll have to come back and start looking at people's lives there. And our association, representing 40 million drivers, we try to get everybody together, and you've got different ways of using cars. Each individual has a different way of using cars. Some people use it for practical reasons. Other people really love driving. Some people go off and do the ring road around Paris just to calm down in the evening. Do you think there's a trend in uses with changes? In other words, we're getting away from the standard image of a car to look at the concept of mobility and the need to move around. You've got the idea of moving back and forth to go to work and for everyday activities and also for leisure activities. Of course, that tends to be different usually in the family. But do you see with your members that there are changes in uses? Well, for people to really love what they're doing, you've got to have something which is not democratic. It's an elitist activity to do something that you love doing. It's a niche interest. You love collecting stamps, but you don't find stamps everywhere. You don't find stamp collectors everywhere. And people who love cars are different. And of course, this love for cars tends to fade with the number of cars. And we don't have that many people who are really devoted to cars, but we have more and more drivers. And we see that there are fewer and fewer kilometers being covered, but then there are fewer cars per household. And if you only had one car per household and you had 20,000 kilometers, and now you have three cars per household, you obviously don't do as many kilometers per car. You can see that people change the way they use their cars, and that's only logical because it's the only means of transport which will take us from point A to point B at any point of time during the day or the night without having to wonder about what we're going to do. We just need to turn the car on, it's outside, and it's a loyal friend there, and it'll take us to our destination if all goes well. And the future for cars is cars. But it's a different car. Okay, there'll be less pollution, and already it's producing less pollution, but it'll be even less in the future. Now, I've heard about these driverless cars. Well, I've tested the driverless car. It was a really nice car. It's very strange feeling. We're used to hanging onto a steering wheel, and this. Oh no, it's okay. Let go of the steering wheel. The car will drive itself. Well, I did let go of the steering wheel. I thought, okay, I've got to do it. And when I let go of the steering wheel, well, I wasn't lucky. You know that there are all sorts of sensors in a driverless car. But in the model that I had, it was the camera which was the dominant factor. And there were no lines on the road surface. And we got to a corner, and there was no line on the road, and the car kept on going straight ahead. And so I had to grab the wheel and go around the corner. I said, okay, well, a driverless car is great. It's no doubt the car for the future. But I'd say if you want to have a driverless car, you need to have a perfect road surface. It has to be like a golf green. And when I look at the state of roads in France at the moment, well, it's something like a mini golf course or a youth hostel that hasn't been properly maintained. We really need to improve our road infrastructure. We need to invest in roads because that's a basic prerequisite for cars to move ahead. You can't think about cars these days without looking at what's underneath the cars. The cars will stay. They're not going to disappear. Okay, you might end up with driverless cars. They're going to end up one day. I don't know when, but they're bound to turn up. But if you don't have quality road surface, then you'll never be able to get these driverless cars driving, and it'll just be a utopian dream. And I don't want to live in utopia. I want to live in the real world. Okay, everyone's working on pollution, the big groups, the big road building groups, the car manufacturers, and even the drivers, because they want to consume less and produce less pollution. But okay, and I'm going to make another statement which is not politically correct. Too bad if I make a few more enemies. I'd like politicians to stop making companies and users feel guilty, and they have to face up to their responsibilities and say that roads are in poor state in France, and that the state of the roads is not going to help us get a greener world. We need to look to the future, and if we want driverless vehicles with less pollution, then we need to look at what we're driving on and to clean up our roads.
I hope that the network managers will hear you. So, Pascal and Jean-Luc Gautier, a big announcement was made about a solo road way. So, Jean-Luc, you invented this process. So, where are we at today and how does it work? Well, good morning to you. Well, this solo road project began 10 years ago when we started to wonder what kind of additional functions we could have in our roads, on the road surface. You know, roads that allow people and goods to travel from point A to point B, but also services that are available most of the time. This was our intuition at the time. And we did a few calculations, and we realized that if we have a look at the road surface that is used by vehicles, if we have a look at the various distances at the time during which those road surfaces are being used, then we are realizing that we only have 10% of the road surfaces that are used at one point in time. So this means that 90% of the time the road surface is not being used at all. So we thought that maybe we could do something about this. And maybe we could recover some energy. So during a few years, we tried several technologies using fluids, using various sensors, thermoelectrical sensors among them. And the only solution, the only path that really seemed viable from a technological and economical point of view is the photovoltaic technology. It allows us to insert photovoltaic cells into the road surface. Well, but once you've said that, you haven't really made any progress because people just think that this is an utopia, they're just dreaming, and then they're asking about heavy trucks driving on the road when they damage the road surface because those cells are very thin and they're very fragile, very breakable. So in 2010, we did a first mock-up, and this allowed us to list all the issues that would be faced with, what kind of materials should be chosen, how they should be fitted into the road surface, how we could make sure that they would be compatible with the road surface. I talk about mechanical strength, but you also need to think about the fact that if a vehicle is on the road, be it a person or be it a truck or a car, you make sure that those people are safe. So as of 2011, we started working with the team in Chambéry working on solar energy. They work for the Solar Energy Agency. And our discussions started to lead to a few solutions. One of our subsidiaries, SMAC, had already acquired specific competencies in fitting amorphous panels onto specific surfaces. And those silicon panels, those amorphous silicon panels that are flexible, provided a good solution. And we started trying them out in Chambéry, and we started working on them. And then we had a car driving at low speed and then at a higher speed, and we tried having the car brake. And we realized that those panels were not showing any decreased performance. So then we decided to put some stones or pebbles on those panels to see whether there would be damage or not. And we didn't notice any major problems. And traditional panels have a Teflon on one side, and they become very slippery as soon as it rains. So in the years 2012, 2013, we worked on a new surface that wouldn't be as slippery, but that would still allow the solar rays to penetrate the surface in order to reach the sails. And then we had worked on transparent resin and recycled glass, and this allowed us to have a very transparent surface that would be very similar to a traditional premix. And in 2013, we ended up with a full-size mock-up that allowed us to validate those assumptions. But then we started thinking about the availability of those flexible materials. During the past few years, there have been many changes in the photovoltaic market with new materials, crystalline silicon being introduced into the market, mostly from China, and they had a very negative impact on those flexible panels. On the market of the panels. So in order to make sure that we could have a good supply, in order to manufacture our cells, we decided to work on a different project. So we have those polycrystalline silicon cells, but in this case, we have a problem with the mechanical holding of the surface, and our team worked on a new structure for those panels. There are a certain number of layers made out of polymers and resins, and there are quite a few patents by Colas and other companies, and they include those cells, and we make sure that those cells actually are fit, and they meet all those constraints. So our project is quite different from other projects that you might have heard of. Photovoltaic road surface. Our project allows us to add our product onto existing road surfaces. Obviously, we have to make sure that the existing road surface is of good quality, but we don't have to redo it all again. So in 2014, the connections were remote connections a bit further away, but now our connectors is actually in the road surface, and it wasn't a huge issue actually, but it allows us to have a road surface that really looks like a traditional pavement, as you can see on the picture on the right-hand side of the screen. So this technology allows us to produce energy using a traditional road surface, be it a road, be it a cycle path, be it a sidewalk. Now, all we have to do now in the months to come is to find all the applications and uses possible with this new product. Well, congratulations and thank you very much. Well, congratulations for achieving this. Congratulations also for really being able to explain all this within this limited time. And I'd like to thank the translators at the back of the room, because it's not always easy to translate when people are so passionate about what they do. So I'm just thanking the interpreters. Pascal DUHOO. So you designed a fantastic product. So now you're going to boost this product, aren't you? Well, good morning to you. So we realized that this product couldn't be broken. We tried this technology with 1 million users, and there were no specific mechanical disorders. So I'm very, very lucky, because I was very much involved in this project, and I quite modestly took part in the development of this product. But does it produce energy? What does it do exactly? Well, yes, it produces energy just like a traditional photovoltaic module, with the difference that because it has a different angle to the sunlight, so we are losing some energy, and but we do produce almost as much energy as a traditional photovoltaic panel. So I read a few articles in the newspapers, and I heard that with 1,000 meters you can produce enough energy to light an entire city. Well, it depends on the place where this road surface is located. Obviously, in Nice you will produce more energy, but we base our calculations on the city of Lyon, that is in the medium range as far as the sunlight is concerned. And in Athens, we would produce 30% more energy than in Nice, for example. So obviously, the location is of utmost importance when you talk about photovoltaic productivity. So this can be installed almost everywhere. Do you have any preferences as to where this should be implemented? Well, obviously, in our case, we're going to adapt to local production rates. So we'll tend to use our technology where property is very expensive, like thinking about places such as Monaco, or isolated locations that need local energy production sites. So obviously the needs differ greatly from one country to the next. And if you're in Africa, or in France, or in Asia, so in Africa you will have more local production sites and storage, local storage sites. In India, the Indian government has decided to solve the electricity production issues and to install many local photovoltaic production sites, and in our case, we don't compete with rural areas and agricultural land. And we just had this project in Bordeaux, this photovoltaic farm. It takes up 350 hectares in order to produce electricity for the town center. It doesn't produce enough electricity for the suburbs. If we wanted to produce enough electricity in order to provide electricity to the rest of the suburbs in Bordeaux, then we would have to have a surface that would be 3 times the size. But thanks to our technology, we can do away with those constraints. So talking about the electrical vehicle, that will mean that people will need more electricity. This will increase the energy demand. So could a road produce that energy? Well, yes, because we're able to have this technology added onto the road surface. We could recharge systems using the dynamic induction, but this will be done in the future. Well, that's a very good project for the future, indeed. So, vehicles have indeed changed a lot. We're talking about G and all the emissions. And when the cars are going to be renewed, obviously there's going to have an impact on those emissions. So rent transportation is the increase. In the Paris area, 1.2 passenger per car. So if we're able to move to 2 or 3 people per car, then obviously this will mean that this will improve traffic and decrease congestion. And the way people use their cars, they will definitely have an impact on all this. And you also have a smart mobility that's going to allow us to improve that fluidity, to make sure that traffic becomes even more fluid. So what I suggest now is that you ask any questions you might have, and I will show you a short video as you'll see. It's a great video, actually, and we love it, actually won an award. But do you have any questions so far? Good morning. I'd like to know whether if the pavement that is covered with wetway still keeps retains its functions, whether it still drains properly, whether it's still good for noise. Well, the surface that's on the front side of the panels has actually very low granularity. And this really is in line with the works that we carried out in the past in order to reduce noise. But a panel surface obviously is watertight in order to protect the sails, so it won't drain water as well as a traditional road surface. But glass granulates provide the same specificities as a traditional premix. Sam Cohen, I work for Renewable Energies in Marseille Town Hall. So have you tested this road in different areas? Because in a city it could be some trees, you could have more shade. Well, right now we did this in Chambéry within the Solar Energy Institute, and we also tested our road at our institute on roads that lead to a parking lot, so at high traffic. Obviously, when the car is driving on the surface, this creates a temporary shade, but we have an electronic system that protects the panel, but we also make sure that those shading effects are minimized. We have diodes that make sure that if there is a temporary shade, this doesn't completely shut down the energy production of that specific panel. So this allows us to offset more or less those effects. And this is the reason why production levels of those panels are not as high as those that are placed on roofs, for example, because they are horizontal. So in our case, we haven't reached the industrial phase. We have an idea of the price, talking about 900 euros per square meter. I mean, those are prototypes so far, and costs are going to go down. Obviously, we are currently negotiating with various companies. And as you know, the photovoltaic industry in France is currently under great pressure, so this makes all the discussions more difficult. So, for your information, there is a small sample on the Bouygues stand. So we have a sample here too, but if you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to come and see us. So our team will be happy to answer all your questions. So I'd like to show you this short video now.
À l'heure de la transition énergétique, imaginez une route capable de capter l'énergie solaire et de produire l'électricité dont nous avons tant besoin. Après 5 années de recherche en partenariat avec l'Institut national de l'énergie solaire, Colas, leader mondial de la route, présente Wattway, le premier revêtement routier photovoltaïque au monde. Wattway fournit localement une énergie propre et renouvelable. Ces panneaux s'installent directement sur les routes existantes et permettent la circulation de tout type de véhicules. Wattway alimente en électricité l'éclairage public, le mobilier urbain, les bâtiments, mais aussi les commerces et les entreprises. Enfin, Wattway offre une solution aux zones isolées non raccordées au réseau électrique. Il y a tant d'applications à imaginer ensemble. Wattway. Faisons de la route l'énergie de demain.